I want to do a formal introduction who you are going to be talking with today or listening to today. This is David Shimotakahara. He is the Artistic Director and founder of the GroundWorks Dance Theater. Before we get him going talking, I want to, on a personal note, I've known David. We danced together before we did your New Works project, David, in 98. We danced together one of our first Bolero shows, probably in 95 or so. So we have a long, respectful, respectful and friendship, I would say also, more important, relationship. And so without further ado, David, hello, how you doing?
Hi, Brian. Hi, everyone. Brian, I first want to thank you for just stepping in on such short notice. And unfortunately, our outreach education coordinator, Rebecca Bircher, fell ill suddenly. So, Brian, thank you so much. And it was so serendipitous that you and I had talked just last night.
Yes.
Brian, you mentioned that you have this ongoing blog called DJ Storybook. Can you just talk very briefly about what that is?
I will. Well, David, essentially, I call and talk to people like you and like any other artists and people about how the COVID-19 situation has affected our lives. And that's really the bottom line of it. And over the last 6 months, I've had over 60 to 70 interviews, and we do virtual performances too. So we have like one tonight, and we've done about 8 or so. I think even Steve saw one of them in a couple weeks ago. So I think that it's a good way for artists like ourselves to talk about how we are dealing with this scenario. And we're going to get into that today, David. And I think that when people hear about your history and people hear about where you're from, and we're going to get into how GroundWorks Dance Theater has been dealing with this scenario. And this is something that I'm very interested in. And I have a feeling, David, with your history and what we can get into, I think we're going to have a lot to say about what you went through in the beginning of this scenario, where you're at now, and where the future of GroundWorks Dance Theater is. So David, I think that we're all curious, as well as I am. Tell me something about your background. What brought you in to dance in the first place?
Yeah. Well, the story I always like to tell is I was a horrible actor, and so it was actually through theater that I got into a movement class for actors, and in Montreal, where I grew up, and I was like, it was such a funny class. I remember there was this guy, Bob Azoris. He may still be alive, and he literally had like bongos, and he would sit in the corner and beat on these bongos, and he had us doing like these funny, jazz steps, like a hitch step and stuff. But I don't know. There was something in that, just the experience of being in my body. That.
How old were you?
Well, I want to say probably about 16 or 17. And it wasn't something that I had thought a lot about. I just tried this, and I knew it's really amazing. I think as I look back, I knew right after that class that I wanted to take more dance classes, and so I started looking, for like real dance classes, and I had no idea where to start or anything like that. But this is back in the very early 70s, and Montreal at that time was going through just a kind of dance awakening. They were really, it was just a really, there's a lot of energy creatively in the city, as there still is.
Yes.
It's just an amazing place. But there was a, you know, like this real energy of like sort of the first generation of new dancers, all starting studios, you know, and and so I kind of rode in on that crest of that wave, just energetically, and it was a great start. I felt, you know, just sort of like infused me with such, you know, such a strong desire. At Coincidentally, at that time, Les Grands Ballets Canadiens, which is the professional ballet company in Montreal, they happened to, you know, they were doing a sort of open call for male students. They wanted to increase male participation. They were, you know, just trying to, again, I think they were struggling too, just to kind of get going. And they opened their doors to anybody that wanted to start to take ballet classes. And I went down with my brother and a couple of our friends,
Nice.
and it was hysterical. We didn't have any of the right clothing, you know. Remember, like, you know, I think we borrowed some tights or something like that, and they were like halfway down to my knees.
Socks, probably. Probably socks. You probably thought you had to be barefoot. You're like,
I don't even.
I'm gonna go. It doesn't. You probably remember. You're probably sliding around, like, what's going on here? But you enjoy. You know what, David? That was probably a pivotal moment. You probably went there and you were like, you know what? I love it.
Well, it was. It was. It was something that the more that I did it, the more I connected, and needless to say, my brother and my friend dropped out pretty quickly, but I was hooked. I was hooked, and so you know, it developed from there. I think I was just kind of going on intuition. There weren't any dance programs per se, like in the colleges or anything like that, and and I would just, you know, show up at different classes and just try different teachers and different places. And fortunately, I think it was about after maybe about 5 or 6 months of taking class, I was taking a lot of jazz classes actually. And this guy, Eddie Toussaint, who ended up having a company in Montreal, he saw me in class, and he offered me to help me continue to train, and that I could, you know, join his company. And yeah, he was, you know, like my first mentor, I guess you would say. And his company did all kinds of things. We did TV, and I remember we did a trip up the banks of the St. Lawrence, these little northern towns on the northern shore of the St. Lawrence in the middle of winter, you know, doing these funny little shows in, I'll never forget it. We actually performed in an ice rink once, like, you know, like it was a hockey arena.
Oh, interesting.
And
That's
they,
good.
yeah, yeah. They just sort of put a platform stage in the middle of center ice, and they put mats, like gym mats, down on top of the ice around the stage so we could stand. Without,
David, I don't want to proceed on. I don't want to go too far in the future, but
yeah,
that makes sense with
yeah.
where your GroundWorks Dance Theater went and the things that you explored over the years. So it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting. It's kind of interesting, David.
Well, anyway, it was. I must have had some kind of bug, because I stayed with it, and I continued. I continued ballet training. It's something I realized that there was, you know, it was something that I really, really needed. It was a skill, and it felt like I was really, really curious, and um, decided that actually I liked ballet more than jazz. You know, at that time anyway, I thought I did, and so I really wanted to focus on ballet training, and I did at Les Grands for almost 2 years. And it was the summer of '77, I guess. Um, Summer of the Son of Sam in New York City. Actually, I went to New York City in that summer to study at the Joffrey Ballet School. They had given me a summer scholarship, and a friend and teacher who um, I had gotten to know in Montreal, and he was giving me sort of private coaching, and he offered to take me down, and we went to New York that summer. I drove my mother's Oldsmobile station wagon full of stuff, and we stayed sort of over by Alphabet City in Manhattan, you know, like the Lower East Side. He had a friend who had a small apartment and a walk-up there, and he put us up. It was just, you know, it was just like a little studio apartment, but he put us up, and we parked. I had all my stuff because I was like, you know, I was moving to New York, and had the stuff in the back of this Oldsmobile station wagon. We parked it, I don't know, like over by Avenue A and 9th Street or something. I don't even remember, but full of stuff, and nothing happened. We were there for about a week, and nothing happened to that car, and nothing happened to the stuff in the car the entire time we were there, and just parking it on the street. So I don't know, you know, it was it's just beginner's luck. But I stayed on in New York, and after that summer decided I wasn't going back to Montreal. And little did I know, it was actually going to be okay, because it so happens that I was born in the United States. My brother and I were both born in Iowa. My dad was interning down at the University of Iowa. And so I had an American birth certificate, but I didn't know it at the time. And, and I remember after about, you know, in the first year of living there, and I was having a great time. I made inquiries about how I could apply for a U.S. You know, visa, and and I remember I got letters of, you know, recommendation from friends of my father's, and who lived in the States, and I put this whole package together. I don't know what I was thinking. Anyway, I came back, you know, a few weeks later, this very, very short note from immigration saying basically, you know, you're already a citizen, you know, between the lines, dummy. You know, so
it's probably relief. It's probably relief then, more than anything else. Even though you put the work into it, you know what I mean. It's probably relief. Don't you think at the time that you were a citizen? That's good. I mean, what luck is that? That's just good. You know what I mean. You don't have to. You didn't have to go through any more of that process anymore. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
But you know, this is sort of like the way my whole I did a talk a number of years ago, and I titled the talk "The Art of Not Knowing." And you know, when I think about sort of a theme that runs through my career, Brian, I think of it being, you know, just incredibly lucky, but sort of the thing that I always know is that I somehow managed to kind of like push into new territory sometimes without knowing, or being sure of in any way that it might actually be possible, even, there is a kind of, maybe it's foolishness, but I look at it as really, a gift, a very fortunate gift that that I feel, that I'm somehow been able to find a way, and not stop myself from attempting certain things that I think if you thought about too much, or if you knew more than not knowing, you might never try. I mean, that's sort of my little theory of life, I guess, at this point, looking back, that somehow not knowing can be good. And it is a way of thinking about process artistically. I think we, as artists, we get used to that not knowing, right? We get used to sort of like being in this zone of discomfort. And we know that somehow something is going to come out of that. I mean, we trust that, and I think it's an important faith to have creatively. So for whatever that's worth, yeah.
David, there's two things I want everybody to, as I write my notes, you said a couple things. I think they're important things that as you go along with what you've been doing in your career, David, push into new territory and zone of discomfort. Those are two interesting things to me. I think that if we guys are listening to this, think about what those are, what that means to you. And just as a reminder also, please post questions for David as he's talking about what he's going to do in his life. And I will continue to give you these points of interest and to think about, in knowing David, it goes right into his personality. This is who David is, pushing into new territory and a zone of discomfort. It's how we think as artists. And it's very pertinent.
Thanks, Brian. So, yeah, fast forward, I think I came to Ohio in '83, which I can hardly believe now, with my wife, Pandora, who I see a lot of people I know on the call, so I know a lot of people know Pandora as well. And by the way, when I first went to New York, she followed me that fall. So,
Wow.
Yeah. But yeah, we came to dance with Heinz Pohl in the Ohio Ballet. And I think, we were just a couple of kids, and we thought, oh, we'll be here for, a couple of years and we'll see what happens. But I do know at the time, we had both been going in and out of different contractual jobs. That in the dance world, that's very, very common. You sign a 7-month contract or an 8-month contract if you're lucky, or I mean, most work is done that way professionally, and every year you have to renew your contract. And so we had been doing that for 5 or 6 years in different. I was in Atlanta, I was in Pittsburgh, Pandora was up in Boston. We were running around basically freelancing and going in and out of New York. And unfortunately, there was a dance boom. And it was possible to go, at the time, to go in and out of New York City quite easily. You could get very, very reasonable sublets, and everybody was just moving around. But it felt really, really unstable. And at least for me, I found it, really challenging to constantly be changing jobs, changing cities sometimes, packing my bags. And we both lived out of suitcases, basically. And so I think coming to Ohio Ballet, we were looking for a place where we could sort of unpack our bags for a while and try to create or be part of a sort of body of work. And I think that idea is becoming kind of a rare commodity almost these days. I feel dancers are very much in flux. There's many reasons for that, but the idea of trying to commit to a place is actually not even necessarily a goal for a lot of professional dancers, I think. And I don't know, who knows if that's better or worse for the art form. But that's an interesting, that could be a whole conversation right there.
I agree, David. I agree. I
But
think that, yeah.
yeah, yeah. You know, but at the time, I think we really wanted to find a place where we felt we could belong. And we didn't know it would be Ohio Ballet, but Heinz was an incredible force in terms of just his he had a very specific vision for the company. And I think, you know, in retrospect, he was in some ways ahead of his time in terms of the idea of a ballet company. And he, you know, his background was very much in both modern contemporary forms and in classical ballet. And he sort of had one foot in both camps. And so this influenced his choice of repertory and the way he liked to work. And it was very much, in its time, very much a crossover company in a lot of ways. And then he sort of took that beyond his own work and the kind of work that he choreographed, which sometimes was very neoclassical and on point and very, very balletic. And sometimes was very, you know, he went back to his roots in Germany and, you know, his training at the Essen School and his experiences with, you know, Jos. And so there was sort of this whole other part of the repertoire that was very, very modern influenced. And then he started to extend that into bringing in guest artists, guest choreographers, and he didn't choose ballet choreographers very often. He actually went to, at that time, he went to some of the most contemporary voices and asked them to create work on the company. And so very early on, you know, I mean, we were the first company to ever do a Pilobolus work outside of Pilobolus. They came, the four founders came to Akron and restaged one of their signature works. And that for Pandora and I, that was one of the most memorable artistic experiences, I think, of our career. And then he brought in other, you know, other guests, Laura Dean. You know, he had Merce come in. He had Betty DeYoung come in from Paul Taylor's company. He had Lucinda Childs create work. A lot of different voices that he started to bring into the mix. So, and I think it made sort of a very interesting repertory. And the company would go to New York, and there wasn't any other ballet companies doing that kind of rep at that time. I don't think. I might be wrong, but and this, since then, of course, that's become much more of a ubiquitous kind of model that small chamber companies do crossover. And they can be very balletic or they can be very contemporary, but they do a lot of different things this way. So I think, you know, coming out of that experience. And I ended up staying with Heinz for 15 years. And I was helping him as a rehearsal assistant and sort of really steeped in the repertory and just a lot of different experiences working with different artists. But that and Heinz also had a life partner who was a world-renowned lighting designer, Tom Skelton. And Tom was really in line with, first generation lighting design in this country. And Tom helped really develop the art form of and stagecraft of lighting for theater and dance. So being exposed to his brilliance as well really gave me an understanding of sort of production values. I think as I look back, I kind of like just, absorbed a lot of great information. And the way that Heinz ran the company was very, very sort of lean, just like, we're going to present the dance on stage with this many dancers. We're not going to have all kinds of, bells and whistles going off. We don't need scenery. He was very much sort of one of this sort of very lean kind of aesthetic. I think all of these things influenced me in when I started thinking about doing my own work. That's kind of where I was coming out of. Yeah.
Hey, David, I think we're going to get into your vision of GroundWorks, and we're getting into your vision because I see the shape actually coming out even before we talk about it. But somebody did ask a question, and I'm kind of curious. It's a good question, actually. What was the best project that you performed in before going to GroundWorks? Do you have a favorite project?
You told us.
Yeah, it was, I think that Pilobolus, yeah, as I look back, that experience, because it was so different. It was really a very, very different way of thinking about movement. And the way they worked, the whole way they thought about what constituted dance was very, very different from anything I had experienced up to that point. So yeah, that was quite a sort of.
And actually, I have another question for you, David. If I were to be sitting in the audience at the time, maybe the 90s, early 90s, and I would watch you, what type of artist would I see? It's a good question, isn't it? If I would have watched you as an audience member, and I know you've been dancing for a long time, and I like the way you dance, and I'm kind of curious what what would they see? What kind of artist were you?
I mean, I know what my strengths were, obviously, but I think what it boils down to was I was always kind of at war with my with this idea of ballet in just physically even, and I had to prove. I guess I had to prove to myself that I could do it, but it wasn't like something that I was destined for. And like I think ballet is very, very cut and dry. It's like classical music. It exists. It has its own sort of standards and criteria, and you either fit the mold or you don't quite. And I think there are people whose physicality just falls right into line, and that's a wonderful thing. I think I always struggled with, I had to, that the teacher that took me to New York told me years later that I was the crookedest thing he'd ever seen walk into a studio. And I believe him, I think it was sort of like, so I'm very aware that I think I started dancing in a way, very much from the inside. I, um, I wasn't sort of like thinking about the form so much, or I wasn't, and I think ballet gave me a way to sort of analyze that a little bit more, or to think, it gave me a way to channel that sort of, but I always had inside this kind of, maybe it's right from that first class, this sort of inner sense of movement. And I've always relied on that, just instinctually. I've trusted that. And I think even as a ballet dancer, I kind of moved that way through the vocabulary. Um, and so I think that's kind of been a through line for me in terms of the idea of GroundWorks was to take what I knew and just to see. I didn't want to deny my background and training in ballet, but I didn't want to use ballet vocabulary particularly to create. I felt there was something else that I wanted to explore in terms of finding ways of moving, finding ways of using my body, and to create work that way and see what would come up. And so GroundWorks, when we started, was really an experiment that way. We knew we all had this sort of intense training background, and yet we were sort of not wanting to just dance in the ballet vocabulary, and just we didn't know where that would take us, and we didn't. I didn't particularly at that time know a whole lot about choreographic process. Again, that was something I just sort of dove into, not knowing, but knowing I think that I would find something. And yeah.
So here we are going into the 90s here, and you've been dancing with Oha Ballet, Heinz Pohl, and you see this influence. You started GroundWorks back in the, I think, 97, 98 time. So talk about that process of taking that jump into creating your own dance company.
Yeah, and so just a leap of faith, right? But I think all dancers sort of think, well, I can do that. I mean, I know that's what they think. I know my dancers think that when they see me, they it's like, oh yeah, well, you just come in here and stand at the front of the room, and that's it. But yeah, so I do remember sitting in the studio with Amy Miller, who was the first dancer I asked to, sort of join me full time in this this experiment, and not the first dancer we had perform with us, because Brian, as you recall, you were part of our very first public performance at Mather Dance Hall on the campus of Case Western Reserve University, and you were part of that very inaugural performance, which I thank you for.
Well, it was a great experience. It was, you could feel that something was happening. We all felt it, David, at the time.
Oh, that's nice. But Amy agreed to sort of do the kitchen work with me. And we were in the studio, I'll never forget this, just sort of looking at each other. And it sort of dawned on us, or dawned on me certainly, that there wasn't any particular structure that was just going to happen. I think certainly in a ballet company, you're used to having that sort of regimen, that daily structure, and you're kind of being told what to do each day. You kind of know what your role is and how to go about it. So that was a real, like, oh, okay, so we have to actually make this as we go along. And we have to create the structure that is going to allow us to continue to work together productively and hopefully happily, you know. And it was the same with doing education and outreach. We had no idea, you know, what sort of, I mean, what could we bring to a classroom of kids who had no background or experience with trained dance? Like, what was that going to become? And crashed and burned many times, you know, in real time with a classroom full of screaming kids. But this whole sort of process of finding out how to work, what would produce the work, was you know, an amazing thing. And I think I'm just so grateful for the people that kind of like had the patience to work with me in those early days, just because it was all being kind of figured out. And you know, I still feel that way in many ways about the company. Like we said from the very beginning, this company is going to be about new work. That's it. It was as simple as that. We were going to always commit ourselves to trying to create and produce and present work that we had originated with, in collaboration with other artists or ourselves. And that's been always the sort of the goal. And to find out what that would become along the way is sort of been one of the aesthetic principles. Not to say that we have this way we're going to dance, period, and that's going to be a GroundWorks stamp. And I've never felt that way, that we you know, we needed to have that kind of identity. But I think as I look back now and see, you know, early video of the company performing, I know we're dancing very differently than those early years. And you know, it changes constantly, but there is something about the way the company performs together. I'd like to think that is identifiably GroundWorks. And I'd love to hear from other people about what they think about that, whether it exists or in what way it exists for them. But I feel somehow, I sense it.
So this has been this continuum with his new works sort of slicing in between the continuum there.
Yeah.
That's what and I guess you answered the question, David, and maybe you can get in a little more detail as you were talking with Amy at that moment years ago and doing this, and now, even though your goal was to do new works in the continuum, do you feel that vision? That how have you evolved as a director and dancer since the beginning of this?
Well, I think you know, for me now, it's and I think as we look to the future, this is only going to increase. And the idea of collaboration became very important to me, and particularly in how the work was being conceived and made, because I grew kind of tired or impatient with my own physical limitations. And I really wanted to try to find a way to create with other people and use, I mean what dancers have to offer physically, I mean, is extraordinary. And so, you know, to be able to tap into that in a very real and interesting way, hopefully, has become a goal. And it's always sort of like, as I look back and the way I create work, it's been a process of figuring out how I can do that with the dancers. Uh, and so, you know, that idea of collaboration and process informs everything we do, and it began to inform the way we design our educational programming. We said we're not going to try to do something that isn't relevant to what the way we're actually working. So we created programming that uses basically the same philosophy of discovery and self-discovery through simple tasks, and then learning how to work with these tools creatively. Um, and so empowering creativity is a kind of theme, you know. Um, and you know, I'm aware of time here, so I don't, you know, I don't want to sort of dwell on just sort of past experience, but you know, I think looking ahead in terms of where the company seems to be heading, this, you know, more and more, I think that the entire organization is sort of operating in a more collaborative model, as opposed to, you know, top down, me making all the choices or all the decisions, and people executing. I think this is something that we're really aware that is going to continue to evolve, and hopefully keep reinvigorating the organization in different ways. Yeah.
So David, this is a good way to segue into what's really going on now with the COVID.
Yeah.
And the words that, again, you know, I want to take some of the words that you were saying, and I maybe talk a little bit about how that can continue, or, you know, the collaborations, creativity, exploration. This really is the groundwork. This is what you've been doing. How do you see that continuing when there's some uncertainty? How do you see that continuing with your company?
Well, you know, we're just like everybody else. We're just sort of like finding it out, right? As things, as events unfold, uh, as the timeline progresses, it's like it changes all your calculations depending on how long this lasts. You know, and you make plans for 2 months, now you make plans for 3 months, then you make plans for 4 months, you know, 6 months. So we don't know specifically, but I would say, you know, what occurred to me very early on, and I think we started right with our benefit in April, was there was going to be a whole shift to technology, in the use of technology, but in using that, it was going to happen on a different scale. That the idea of you know, a large performance, you know, the proscenium stage, correcting a large crowd, obviously is not a working model. Our benefit, you know, usually attracts hundreds of people, and, you know, it's this big, wonderful gathering, and so, you know, we switched to the idea of, okay, so how can we be creative in these frames of, you know, being apart, but still create something that's connected in a way, and sort of use that as the creative challenge. And so we still made dances, and I think it just worked beautifully. With beyond that, the whole way that event sort of came together, we had to pivot in a matter of weeks from this large scale live event to being online, was completely a team effort, from the board down, you know, down to every member of the staff. They were like helping make choices and decisions about how things could work, you know. Yeah, and it was like when it succeeded, and you know, we went beyond our goal financially it succeeded, and then when it succeeded at this other level, which it really brought the company together. I think dancers, staff, board, in this wonderful way, this new way, because they all felt, I think, more invested in a way that might not have happened otherwise. So I mean, that's ideally where I hope the company will continue to be able to thrive, is this sort of way of thinking about programming that involves everybody in a different way. And I think scale is one of it. One of the things that we're working with. I mean, we've never kind of been hung up on big things. I mean, we've always valued intimacy, valued small scale. That works to our advantage because we're not. That's not a transition for us. That's something that we've always valued. But to think that also that it doesn't have to be one thing. It doesn't have to be one performance series that that is your touchstone to community. And so to think about all the different ways that we can connect the work we're involved with, the ideas that we're involved with, to think about how do we weave those things together. That was sort of the genesis of nextSPACE. And to use that as the frame for lots of different kinds of activities that we know we can do in manageable ways that are flexible enough that we can make them COVID-proof, or resilient, and yet, and in a way, it gives us the opportunity to connect in so many more different ways. So, sort of that discovery too is like, why didn't we think of this before? Is, I think, really, really a wonderful thing.
There's somebody had asked a question about audience, in Cleveland. But, actually, I think COVID in this scenario opened your audience up to much bigger range now. I mean, your voice can go beyond Cleveland now, more than it probably was like that before, but it's almost, it's inevitable. Do you agree? I mean, is that something that I think it's going to happen naturally.
Well, people are finding out now, like, for instance, the dancers were training online for a number of weeks, and they had access to classes from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
We've been sort of trying to find cross-training opportunities for the dancers, and one of the models we've been hoping to find locally is really world-class Gaga teacher. And I think that just to sort of have that, suddenly they could do that, even though obviously it was by themselves, but it was still access to something that they might not have found otherwise. Yeah.
David, we have a lot to talk about, but so I wanted to get some of these questions here.
Sure.
These people are asking, and I do appreciate everybody getting the questions in. We have a few minutes here, and I feel like some of these are important questions. Somebody talk about your new work, Jigsaw.
So I was at my friend Penny Rakoff's for dinner, and she has this amazing collection of antique jigsaw puzzles, and it just got me thinking about that is an idea of how you try to find the way something fits together, and so it just felt like a really great conceptual hook, and we started to explore kind of shape discovery, shape sensing, the way that people sort of feel their way, and all of these ideas became metaphors, for the way we find our place, we find each other, the way we connect or disconnect, all of those things it just felt really, really rich. And it has been. And we started a process online. Um, uh, I should say that only 2 of our dancers right now are three from last year left the company. So 2 right now are currently employed. During the initial phases of the pandemic, the company, we kept everybody on salary right until the middle of May, and then when their contracts finished, I didn't want to rehire dancers until I had some kind of understanding of what might happen. But Annie and Nicole knew they wanted to return this year, and we made, we kept them. We just renewed their contract, and so really, we're creating right now as a really small, tight unit. Annie and Nicole together. So in that way, we're avoiding some of the risk of having them work together. And yeah, so the piece initially I wasn't thinking it would be, I thought it was going to be for the full company. But it's morphed into this incredibly beautiful duet. I'm really, really excited about how it's evolving.
Talk about what we're going to see here in August. You have a show coming up here shortly in a couple of weeks, correct?
Yeah. So part of nextSPACE is thinking about the different places, the different spaces that our art can exist, be it virtual or online, and so we wanted to mix in some opportunities to actually do something in person. And so there was this great model that Jacob Jonas' company in Los Angeles had some success with in May, and he did a performance in a parking lot, in an airport parking lot, and I said, "That's so great. Let's try it. Let's." So we partnered with Midtown Cleveland and in Akron with the Downtown Akron Partnership, and a number of other wonderful community partners have just sort of like, we've been looking for different community partners that we can help us put together these different activities. So we're going to use the Agora parking lot, the back parking lot in the Agora, for our Cleveland parking lot show. And we'll arrange the cars in a circle, a large circle. It's limited, therefore, in terms of number of cars. And everybody will be distanced in that they'll be in their car, but also it's not going to be, large crowds standing around. And we're going to use the headlights for the lighting. So I don't know. We'll see. Maybe nobody can see anything because they're blinded by the headlights. I think if we distance the cars enough, that the headlights are focused to hit the road, so it may not be so glaring. We're going to look at that. Yeah. See.
Nice.
Yeah.
So there was a question about audiences that I had mentioned before, and this could be a long discussion about how Dance Cleveland and the relationship with different organizations in Northeast Ohio. Maybe just touch base a minute, just as the last couple of minutes, about how you think that this situation that we are now is actually may encourage more partnerships. They may have mentioned Dance Cleveland specifically, but also other local dance companies. Do you see that being something that is going to be encouraged?
Well, I think the idea of collaboration is absolutely necessary now, as we're all looking for different and new ways to connect. And we just can't you can't do that on your own. Um, um, I think for it's what's going to be important for dance, and I really feel, um, you know, it's almost going to be like the second wave. I mean, there's a lot the arts can do, and maybe social service agencies are kind of going to be in the first wave of recovery, and like the second wave has to be with you know the spirit, and also I think there's some really important work that's going to need to be done with just kind of the trauma of the collective trauma that we are all experiencing, um, and are still in the midst of. Um, and I think it's really going to be important for I know just dance to just kind of listen to what what is needed in the community, and to sort of try to rethink um, what we have to offer in response to those needs. Um, and that's really kind of where I'm trying to anticipate, you know, because it just can't be business as usual. And I don't think anybody wants it to be, you know. I think this is a huge opportunity to rethink what we prioritize and how we connect. And so, I'm in many ways, I'm very grateful. I don't think, like I was saying before, we might not have tried some of these ways of working together. We might not have, done that. We'd just be getting ready for the next concert series, you know. And I mean, this is so profound in terms of how it affects how people work together. Um, and I think, yeah, I agree, Brian. You know, there's a lot that can come out of this, and but I can't predict it. I just know that we kind of create this frame that we feel can be as flexible as possible for now, and do things in a way that is not endangering our artists or the people that participate with us, and that's kind of where we're at right now, and try to stay as creative as possible within those parameters. Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's a good way to finish this, David. I think that we as artists, as directors, um, I think that we're tenacious. People had said that yesterday. We're very tenacious, you know. And David, with I feel that all of us, I think, listening to you, there's a sense of hope. There's a sense, you know what, we're going to make through this. And I want everybody to check out his show. Give me the dates again for your show coming up in August.
Yeah, the pop-up at the Agora will be on the 15th. They're both Saturdays. And then in Akron, right down the lot that's next to the Akron Art Museum in downtown Akron, will be there on the following weekend, the 22nd.
Yeah. We need to go check him out. Go check out what he's doing. It's a good time to get out, get in your car and watch through your car. Whatever it is we need to do, we need to support what GroundWorks is doing. So I want to say thank you so much, David, for sharing your story. I think you some a lot of poignant things that you said, and I think we all can sit back and take something very valuable from this conversation. So
thank you.
Yes, appreciate it. So this is the nextSPACE with David Shimotakahara. This is the artistic director and founder of the GroundWorks Dance Theater. Thank you, everybody, for joining on Facebook and YouTube. If you did not see this whole thing, you must take time and listen to it. It will be on YouTube. Is that correct? It'll be on a YouTube link. Is that correct? That we can get to. Yeah. So make sure you contact GroundWorks. Hey, I got I gotta watch this. And I would encourage, if you didn't, maybe you missed something, go back. It's got a great story, and it's a story that we all need to hear. So, David, thank you so much for this experience. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We all appreciate it. Yes, we give it a nice little hand, guys. Everybody give a little hand. Thank you very much. And, you know, I think that sometimes we don't have questions in our mind at the time that we're listening. You know, I would encourage you to contact GroundWorks and talk to him about some of the questions you have, and because he's got a lot of good things to say. So thank you very much, David. Thank you everybody for enjoying this experience. And do you have these once a month, David? Is this something that happens on an ongoing once a month process?
Well, as part of nextSPACE, as I said, there's a lot of different events and activities planned. And in a couple of weeks, we'll be featuring Antonio Brown, who is going to be one of our guest artists this year, and he'll be live in an artist talk.
Nice. Well, I think you can probably go on the website or contact GroundWorks for more information. So, all right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. And again, thank you, David. And I think this is a good time to finish. Bye, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you.